Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Doug Smith, and this is the 13th video in the series that we are calling the Opioid Monologues, Lucky 13. We're going to focus in this video on our community leaders as we conclude this first half of the Opioid Monologues. We have covered a tremendous amount of science, and we have debunked, just demolished, the urban legend known as opioid addiction. Remember that? Remember opioid addiction, that theory of opioid addiction as a result of a dopamine surge following exposure to the opioids? Only problem was the science didn't show a surge in dopamine. Remember that? And it's good that we have peeled back all that nonsense, much like peeling back the layers of an onion. But now it's time to turn our attention to our community leaders. Okay, so let's just slow down a moment and let's see things from the perspective of the community leaders. Say what you wish about opioid addiction. Say it was inaccurate, dishonest, harmful, a judgmental label. Say it was not supported by science. But here's something the concept of opioid addiction did accomplish. The concept of opioid addiction gave our community leaders an easy, simple way of looking at the opioid crisis. Granted, it was inaccurate, but it was simple. Okay? Oh, it's just the opioid addiction. Get them into rehab and detox. Get them into a program. Okay? Get them into counseling. Okay, all that stuff was worthless. None of it helped the people with an opioid dependency due to the toxicity of DNA methylation, but opioid addiction did supply the community leaders with a simplistic view and easy to understand action items. So, no matter how inaccurate opioid addiction may have been, it was simple to understand and conceptually at least simple to address. Now that we have taken that away from the community leaders, now that we have taken away the simple concept of opioid addiction, and now it is on us to replace that simple concept. And here's the truth. We cannot replace something simple with something complex and expect to make any progress. Simple and inaccurate, okay, isn't going to get us anywhere, but complex and accurate isn't going to get us anywhere either. We must have simple and accurate. That's what we need. We need simple and accurate if we are going to successfully turn this opioid crisis around in our communities. We need a diagnosis that is simple to understand and share. And we need a solution that is simple and easy to implement. And fortunately, we can do this. We can supply a stunningly simple way of viewing this opioid crisis and a solution that is equally as simple. But before we get into the solution, let's spend some time on this simple way to view the opioid crisis, okay? A view that is even simpler than the inaccurate concept of opioid addiction. Now, I'm going to give you two words, just two words that can describe and summarize this entire opioid crisis. Okay, you ready? Here are the two words: defective product. That's it. Defective product. And one last time for our community leaders: defective product. Now I'm going to give you a sentence that summarizes this entire opioid crisis. The opioids are a defective product. The opioids are a defective product. And one last time for the community leaders: the opioids are a defective product. That's it. That's how simple this is to understand. The opioids are a defective product. The opioids cause a poisoning, a toxicity to our DNA. This poisoning, this toxicity is known in science as methylation. Okay? Now, we will get to the solution later, but now we have a simple and easy way of viewing this opioid crisis. It's called product defect. Okay, but let's not stop here. Let's strengthen this simple concept with a comparison that we are all familiar with. See, this false narrative of opioid addiction had another flaw. In the history of mankind, I'm just not aware of an episode of mass addiction. A bunch of people simultaneously becoming addicted to medicine. Sorry, it just doesn't make sense to me, okay? Mass addiction, okay? There are no historical precedents, but product defect, now that's easy. There are plenty of historical precedents for product defect. Car manufacturer puts out a faulty airbag, people get hurt, company takes responsibility, situation gets fixed. Now we have mentioned earlier back in the first video the comparison to lead poisoning. Lead paint was a defective product. Okay, lead paint actually does at least some of its damage through methylation of the DNA. And lead paint causes a neurotoxicity. Opioids cause methylation and also manifest symptoms as a neurotoxicity. So, lead paint is a pretty good historical precedent for opioid toxicity, but we have an even better analogy. We have an even better historical precedent, and I'm talking about tobacco. I am talking about cigarette smoking, okay? And let's see if you agree or disagree with me that there are striking similarities between the current opioid crisis and the previous product defect that we had with cigarette smoking, okay? First off, both industries behaved badly when scientific evidence began to surface that was negative for their product. The tobacco industry denied, okay, the consequences of smoking. The opioid manufacturers, okay, they're hiding behind the falsehood of opioid addiction while scientific evidence of methylation is mounting. Remember these studies by Nielsen, Shorbov, Walkman, and Walkman? I'm not so sure I'm willing to concede that the pharmaceutical industry is so incompetent that they would miss the significance of this science. I think they're just hiding behind the apron strings of the false concept of opioid addiction. And they're going to hide there for as long as they can. And here is a further comparison, one that we can draw between the opioid crisis and the tobacco debacle. Look at the advertising, okay? Both these industries, the cigarette manufacturers and the opioid manufacturers, they push their products through advertising and marketing aimed at increasing sales, increasing the revenue, increasing the money, okay? We're going to look at the marketing for the opioids in a future video, okay? Let me just summarize this as saying the marketing was some of the most dishonest marketing ever aimed at physicians. And we physicians were trusting, at least of the FDA. That's why this dishonest and, in my opinion, illegal statement inserted by the FDA into the OxyContin package insert did so much damage and did it so quickly. The physicians had never really had to doubt or mistrust the FDA on medications. The trust by the medical community towards the FDA was beyond reproach, and that trust was turned and used as a tool against the physicians. We will look in depth soon into an article by Caitlin Esch, okay, how one sentence helped set off the opioid crisis. But for now, let's look at that one sentence and how it was inserted into the OxyContin package insert and by an FDA regulator named Dr. Curtis Wright. Okay, and here is that sentence. Delayed absorption as provided by OxyContin tablets is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. Is believed? Is believed? Is believed by whom? Santa Claus? The Easter Bunny? And as we will see when we spend more time on this future episode, OxyContin didn't do the required studies, but they got a sentence inserted into the package insert sort of implying that they had done the studies. Then they sent out 600 drug reps nationwide to promote and spread this garbage. By the way, shortly after this sentence was inserted into the package insert for OxyContin, Dr. Curtis Wright left the FDA and took a job with OxyContin, with Purdue, the manufacturer of OxyContin. And to the best of my knowledge, Congress has never looked into this potential sweetheart deal. How can we expect meaningful change at the FDA when they haven't even acknowledged their role? Okay, let's look again at this sentence. Delayed absorption, as provided by OxyContin tablets, is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. Now, please allow me to point out something here, okay? Typically, the FDA would use words in the product insert such as is shown to. That is the expectation of what a physician such as myself would expect to read. And we read the package inserts very carefully. This substitution of is believed to in place of is shown to, this substitution was so tricky and so subtle, it was missed. That's actually how this whole opioid crisis got started. The opioid crisis began with deceptive advertising. It's that simple. We will look into this in more depth in a future video, but for now, we are drawing the comparison between the public health threat that was cigarette smoking and the public health threat that is the opioid crisis. And we are discussing the role of deceptive advertising, okay? Look at that sentence cooked up by the FDA and OxyContin. That is deception. And that is deception with intent to mislead the physicians. The pharmaceutical industry cooked up a scheme to trick and deceive the physicians into believing OxyContin was a safe medication. And the scheme worked, mainly due to the enormous level of faith and trust the physicians had placed in the FDA. See how this trust was used against the physicians and in a marketing campaign? This is deceptive advertising of a flawed product. And cigarette smoking was deceptive advertising of a flawed product. That's one of the similarities between cigarette smoking and the opioids. Both industries used deceptive advertising to promote a defective product onto the unsuspecting population. And a lot of people were hurt. We saw the advertising and we saw the deception in the advertising in the instance of the opioids. Okay? This dishonest sentence inserted into the OxyContin package insert that says, delayed absorption as provided by OxyContin tablets is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. Is believed is a dishonest and deceptive statement. And now let's look at some of the advertising that was used to promote the cigarette smoking. Look here, okay? Look at these images. Pregnant women, happy babies, doctors promoting smoking, dentists promoting smoking, and it's all lies, okay? Both industries lied about their defective product, and both industries lied to the people through advertising and implied their product was safe, and neither of these two products are safe. In fact, both work their damage by methylation to the DNA. Did you hear what I just said? Both defective products were promoted by deceptive advertising, and both products caused mass methylation in the population of the DNA. Okay? What do the two massive public health disasters in recent history, the tobacco and the opioid disasters, what do they have in common? Both were caused by industries pushing out a defective product and with false and misleading advertising. Both resulted in episodes of mass methylation. What evidence do we have to support that statement? The statement being that both industries utilized deceptive advertising to promote defective products that resulted in mass DNA methylation. We can support that statement. Okay, we have already seen the dishonest advertising by the tobacco industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Okay, and we have seen the DNA methylation in the opioids and from the studies by Nielsen, Shorbov, Walkman, and Walkman. Now let's turn our attention to the scientific evidence that cigarette smoking also caused its damage through a methylation of the DNA. Let's begin by looking at the 4 big diseases linked to cigarette smoking. And here is the list of the big 4. Lung cancer, emphysema, low birth weight babies, and atherosclerosis. Okay, diseases of the heart and blood vessels. Okay, let's look first at lung cancer. How does smoking cause lung cancer? Well, look right here. Smoking causes lung cancer through methylation of the DNA. And now let's look at emphysema. Okay? How does cigarette smoking lead to emphysema? And we see the answer right here. Cigarette smoking causes emphysema through a methylation of the DNA. And now let's look at low birth weight babies. Okay? How does cigarette smoking lead to low birth weight babies? And we see the answer right here. Cigarette smoking causes low birth weight babies through a methylation of the DNA. And lastly, the 4th example, atherosclerosis. Right here. Okay, diseases of the heart and blood vessels. How does cigarette smoking lead to atherosclerosis? And we see the answer right here. Cigarette smoking causes atherosclerosis through a methylation of the DNA. Now, stop and think about this for a moment. This is a huge and important concept. Opioids don't cause opioid addiction. Opioids are a defective product causing mass methylation of the population. This is stunningly similar to the mass methylation that we saw with the cigarette smoking. Both are a defective product, and both were promoted onto the unsuspecting population through deceptive advertising. Amazing. And we're not done yet with this analogy, this comparison. Remember, we're trying to build a simple model, a really simple way for community leaders to view this opioid crisis now that we have taken away the mistaken concept of opioid addiction. And we are using the analogy of the defective product of the tobacco and the opioids to help us understand, okay, how this happened in our communities. Both were promoted by dishonest industries utilizing deceptive advertising. Both defective products resulted in mass methylation. But we are now going to look at this in even more granular level of detail, okay? Remember back when we looked at how it was the methylation of the CPG islands within the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene and the resulting gene silencing that resulted in the formation of a dysfunctional opioid receptor? We looked at this in great detail. Go back and review it if you need to. Well, let's now look closer at how the methylation due to cigarette smoking leads to lung cancer, okay? And let's just take this one example. Let's just look at this one study, okay? And we see it's methylation of the CPG islands, and again, within the promoter region of the gene, okay? Let me put this into plain English for everyone to understand. The process within the DNA that's caused by the opioids is identical to the process within the DNA that's caused by cigarette smoking and leads to cancer. Not similar, identical. Again, not similar, identical. The opioids cause methylation of the CPG islands within the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene. This resulted in gene silencing and an abnormal opioid receptor that allowed autonomic conflict to occur when opioid abstinence was attempted. Cigarette smoking causes a methylation of the CPG islands within the promoter region, again, of a different gene called P16. This methylation again causes gene silencing. It just so happens that P16 is a gene that searches out and prevents abnormal cell growth, cancer. So when you silence P16 with methylation, well, you get cancer, okay? This is really straightforward stuff. Silence the gene that prevents cancer and you get cancer. But the main point we are making here is that it's the methylation of the CPG islands within the promoter region of the gene that is a shared pathway by both the opioids and the cigarette smoking. Now stop and think about this. Both defective products shared identical pathways that lead to their damage. Both defective products were put out by a dishonest industry. Both defective products were promoted through deceptive advertising. Both products resulted in methylation of the DNA. Both products even resulted in methylation of the CPG islands within the promoter region of their respective genes. The opioids cause methylation on the CPG islands within the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene and resulted in gene silencing. Cigarette smoking caused methylation on the CPG islands within the promoter region of the P16 gene and resulted in gene silencing. These are remarkable similarities. This is why we can say to our community leaders, don't worry about leaving behind the flawed but simple concept of opioid addiction. We have an even simpler way of viewing this opioid crisis. This simple concept is to just look at the opioids as a defective product that are causing a poisoning within the people. This defective product and its poisoning is identical to the defective product and the resulting poisoning that we saw with cigarette smoking. Now, we have a simple way of looking at the opioid crisis and without the flawed concept of opioid addiction muddying the waters. Now that we have the clarity of seeing the opioids as the defective product that they truly are, now that we understand the strong comparison between the opioids and cigarette smoking, and that both have produced mass methylation within our population, and both are driven by deceptive advertising. Now, finally, we can turn our attention to bringing this opioid crisis to a closure. Fortunately, for those who are now methylated within the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene and due to opioid exposure, that is to say, those who experience autonomic conflict when attempting opioid abstinence, for those people, there is a treatment, and it works great. And that treatment is to begin them on 16 milligrams a day of buprenorphine. Okay, this 16 milligrams a day of buprenorphine, this is known as the blockade level, and results in 80, maybe even 85% in some people, saturation of the opioid receptors. Okay, bottom line is that the needless, preventable, and premature dying stops, and that's the first step. Let's stop this dying, and on a national level. We will jump right into how to stop this dying in the next video. For now, I am Dr. Doug Smith, and these are the Opioid Monologues. Thank you.